This video will help you understand how to delay required minimum distributions through the use of a QLAC. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a certified financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. At some point in your 70s, the IRS is going to start mandating that you take out a certain amount from your pre-tax retirement accounts. And ultimately, these forced liquidations are called required minimum distributions. Conceptually, this isn't a huge problem if your distribution rate or how fast you're taking money out of your accounts is well in excess of the required minimum distribution amount. However, if you don't need the amount of money the IRS is forcing you to take out to support your lifestyle, unfortunately that can have some pretty large downstream effects we'll talk about later. Ultimately, it just results in a tax disadvantageous situation. One strategy to delay the impact of required minimum distributions in your retirement accounts is through the use of a QLAC, or Qualified Longevity Annuity contract. This strategy involves moving money from your IRA into a QLAC, delaying the required minimum distributions until you're 85. So in this video, we'll break down how the QLAC works so you can decide if it's right for your retirement plan. So let's jump in. For a quick refresher on required minimum distributions, these are the mandatory retirement account withdrawals that the IRS forces people to take out of their pre-tax retirement accounts. Again, these are things like pre-tax IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, 457b, deferred compensation plans, etc. Essentially, if you took a tax deduction on this account, you're going to have some required minimum distributions when you're in your 70s. Now, based on when you were born, that will dictate at what point in your 70s you'll have to start taking out required minimum distributions. For a quick refresher on those dates, if you were born before 1951, you're already taking out required minimum distributions, or you should be. And so nothing changes for you in this situation. If you were born between the beginning of 1951 and the end of 1959, then your required minimum distribution start date is going to be when you are 73. And if you were born after January 1 of 1960, then your required minimum distribution start date is going to be at age 75. Now, regardless of when you were born, the IRS still permits IRA owners to delay their first required minimum distribution. So in the year that you turn either 73 or 75 respectively, you have the ability to delay your first RMD until April 1st of the following calendar year. Now, that might sound like a no-brainer tactic. However, if you do make that delay, you'll essentially have two required minimum distributions to take out in that next year. And that might not be the most tax advantageous thing to do. So while you can delay, it might not make sense to. There's other exceptions to mandatory required minimum distributions, such as if you're at an employer and you're still working at that employer, you won't have required minimum distributions out of that 401k, unless you're more than a 5% owner in the company. So it might make sense to speak with a professional in your unique situation before you start taking out required minimum distributions or not. Generally, each account is going to have its own required minimum distribution calculation, and that's found through taking the balance of the account and dividing it by how much longer the IRS thinks you're going to live, essentially. And they have life expectancy tables you can find online. Now, some accounts can be pulled together like IRAs. For example, if you had more than one IRA, you would only need to take out an RMD out of one of the accounts to satisfy the overall required minimum distribution. And that could come in handy if, let's say, you have some particularly illiquid investment in one IRA, you can satisfy the required minimum distribution out of a different IRA so that you don't have to sell out or take a penalty on whatever investment you've made in the other IRA. So as mentioned earlier, required minimum distributions are really only a problem if they exceed what you're planning to distribute out of your account. However, if you've saved a good amount in a pre-tax retirement account, that can be very problematic if the required minimum distribution is well in excess of what you are planning to distribute to support your retirement lifestyle. Since any pre-tax IRA withdrawals are taxable, if you don't need the money, that just results in a higher tax bill for you in a situation where you otherwise wouldn't want to pay income taxes. More taxable income in retirement can be problematic because the more taxable income you show in your tax return means the more of your Social Security is included in your taxable income. Said another way, more of your Social Security is taxable if you show a higher taxable income. A higher taxable income in retirement might also push you into IRMA thresholds, or income-related monthly adjustment amount. And IRMA thresholds dictate whether or not you're going to pay more or at parity with everybody else for Medicare Parts B and D. And there are a few ways to lessen the impact of required minimum distributions ahead of time. These would be things like Roth conversions well before you need to start taking out required minimum distributions. In addition, you could look into, after the age of 70 and a half, making qualified charitable distributions out of your IRA if, for example, you're charitably inclined and you don't need the required minimum distribution. But a very straightforward method of delaying required minimum distributions, and the genesis of this video today, is using the QLAC. The QLAC permits the IRA owner to delay a portion of their IRA until age 85. Thus, they don't need to factor in the transferred balance as part of their required minimum distribution calculation. The QLAC strategy is only permissible by the IRA owner. So if you inherit an IRA, you can't do this. And if you're the surviving spouse who inherits an IRA, you can't do this. Unless you as the surviving spouse mark that IRA as your own IRA, then you can do the QLAC. The current IRS maximum for transferring money from an IRA into a QLAC is $200,000. So for example, if you have a $5 million IRA, the maximum you can move into a QLAC is $200,000. Now, technically, the QLAC is an annuity contract. So what's happening is you're giving an insurance company a lump sum of money, in this case $200,000, and the insurance company is promising you a guaranteed income for life whenever you start taking out distributions. Generally, there will be some level of return of premium or death benefit option, whereby if you pass away before getting any income, the insurance company will make you whole with sending you back $200,000. Or once you start taking out distributions, if you haven't returned yet $200,000 in your initial investment, then whatever's left over when you die will come to the family by way of a death benefit. So generally, there's no, you give an insurance company money, you die the next day, and all your money's gone. And while you can take distributions out of a QLAC before the age of 85, just like Social Security, the longer you're willing to delay taking out income, the higher your payment will be. Now, before the Secure Act 2.0 was passed at the end of 2022, the QLAC rules dictated that once you move money into a QLAC, you no longer have to factor in that balance as part of your overall required minimum distribution calculation. However, that also means that any income you pull out of the QLAC at age 85 or later doesn't actually factor into satisfying any required minimum distributions. So said another way, once you transfer the money, you technically have a smaller required minimum distribution every year because you have a smaller amount of total countable IRA balances. However, if your required minimum distribution at age 90 was $20,000 and you pulled $5,000 of income out of the QLAC, you can't use that $5,000 to offset the $20,000 required minimum distribution. You'd still have to take out $20,000 from your other IRA balances. And that's a little bit intuitive that if you're not going to count the fair market value balance of the QLAC, then you don't get to count the income towards required minimum distributions. After the passing of the Secure Act 2.0 at the end of 2022, there was an additional option provided to QLAC owners. So there's still the option, if you don't want to, you don't have to include the fair market value of the QLAC as part of your RMD calculation, but then you don't get to factor in the income to satisfy your RMD. However, now you're given the option, if you want to, you can include the income from the QLAC as part of your RMD, but then you have to factor in the fair market value of the QLAC as also part of your total required minimum distribution calculation. And IRA owners are given the option. So the prevailing wisdom here is don't factor in the fair market value of the QLAC until you're actually pulling out income. That way, you have the smallest RMD possible between whenever you send the QLAC the money and age 85, and then at age 85, although at that point you'd start including the total QLAC as part of your RMD calculation, you also get to include the income to satisfy that required minimum distribution. Since the QLAC is technically an annuity, the fair market value of that annuity goes down every year after you start pulling out income. And that's because the insurance company is on the hook for less and less time, presumably, to pay you an income out of this annuity. And that's because every year after pulling out income, you're getting closer and closer to the end of those mortality tables, also known as death. So, should you buy a QLAC, yes or no? Well, bottom line up front, or I guess halfway through the video, is in general, no, you should not buy a QLAC. And while there are compelling reasons for the use of a QLAC, such as, you're delaying required minimum distributions, your principal is safeguarded, once you give an insurance company 200 grand, it's there until the insurance company goes bankrupt, which is generally a low likelihood. In addition, if you otherwise would park that $200,000 in your IRA in cash or bonds, the QLAC would probably give you a higher rate of return. And there could be some emotional satiation from knowing that you're going to have guaranteed income for the rest of your life, starting at age 85 or earlier if you pull the trigger on income earlier. And that can be pretty satisfying to older investors, knowing that they will not run out of money. In addition, that psychological comfort of knowing that you'll have a guaranteed income coming through the door might allow you the ability to feel more comfortable taking greater risk with the rest of your IRA balances and investing in stocks or just equity-oriented things like mutual funds or index funds or ETFs. And that ideally would result in a higher rate of return than if you otherwise took those remaining IRA balances and kept them in like a 60-40 portfolio. Ultimately, however, I find the pitch for a QLAC to be more emotional than academic for a few reasons. If you transfer 200 grand into a QLAC, you by definition have opportunity cost of no longer having that $200,000 invested in equities, earning that proverbial 8, 9, 10% on average. In addition, that $200,000 transfer is an irrevocable decision and it's illiquid. So rather than getting a guaranteed income for life meeting all of your expenses, if you have major cash flow issues, the QLAC is not going to be your friend there. And for older adults that might have some type of long-term care event, major expense, whatever, the QLAC is not going to help them in that regard with affording a major expense. And the math also seems to show that even if you have to take out required minimum distributions from your IRA, if you just reinvest those required minimum distributions into like a non-retirement investment account that grows with taxable capital gains, you still outperform the QLAC's average performance. So net of taxes, it still seems like not using the QLAC makes sense. And while guaranteed income is great, when it starts in your mid-80s, that's not a particularly long amount of time unless your family typically lives hundreds of years, where the IRA owner really benefits from that promised guaranteed income. It'd be way more comforting to have that guaranteed income start at retirement and last for your entire retirement, rather than 85 and essentially the last half of your retirement. So calls to action wise, I'd examine your financial plan to see what the impact of required minimum distributions are going to be. If it's not going to be a problem, you have nothing to worry about. If it is going to be a problem, there's probably some more efficient strategies to layer in well ahead of time, like Roth conversions or QCDs, that could help lessen the impact of required minimum distribution excess taxation on your retirement plan. However, if you otherwise would park your retirement balances inside of very low yielding securities, it could absolutely make sense to look into introducing the QLAC. Speak with your advisor, and if you need further questions, drop them in the comments below, get in touch on the website, we'll get you squared away. Have an awesome rest of your week. Talk to you later. Bye.